in communicating sustainability, and especially on climate communications. The main areas, the main findings are that they're saying that there's two extremes of communication that are currently being used to communicate sustainability and climate change communications. The first one they've dubbed climate porn, essentially meaning a secretly thrilling sort of sensationalist approach to communicating the potential horrors to come. Consider the media alarmist headlines, climate chaos out of control, Earth beyond the point of no return, images of New York underwater, rainforests on fire, essentially that we're all doomed and there's nothing we can do. Obviously, it's not a particularly constructive message, and that approach just perhaps moves people from denial to despair or paralyzes them and prevents them from taking action. And then the second category essentially is sort of the opposite, climate yawn. Instead of scaring people to death, basically boring people to death by saying, that just the small actions make the difference. Change your light bulbs, get your boiler service, pump up your car tires. And these things are, of course, important, but they're not enough by themselves. They're not compelling enough, really, to move people to take the kind of actions that we need people to take. And worst of all is when you combine these approaches and tell people that, the apocalypse is nigh, what are you going to do? Well, before you go to bed, just make sure the TV is not on standby. It's intuitively sort of a ludicrous disparity. And so the research suggests that a better approach to communicating is essentially to learn from consumer media and to treat communicating sustainability like selling any brand. And that essentially we should learn from these masters of communication. They don't sell products by scaring people to death or boring people to death. They motivate people in other ways. They don't lecture people. They don't harangue people. Essentially, they craft messages that make people want to buy into an idea, and they make their brands appealing and exciting. They inspire and compel people to take action, whether it be buy a product or engage in some activity, to see the value in that brand in itself. And so increasingly what the research suggests is that we should be putting out a message that you can make a big, perhaps exciting, invigorating change in your life, not just the sort of small, boring ones. And perhaps you can be more fashionable by a hybrid like Leo DiCaprio, or you can be first, best, and different in something. Perhaps be the first person to convert your house into a mini power station by putting solar panels on the roof or a wind turbine or whatever. Perhaps you can be more interesting by keeping bees and selling honey to your friends. Put a green roof on with wildflowers in spring. Making new friends by getting involved in community action groups, trading markets, developing a bike share, a car share scheme. And so essentially when we communicate sustainability, we should be trying to sell a sense of possibility, not trying to sell sacrifice, selling imagination and hope rather than sort of dullness and despair, and remembering perhaps people like Martin Luther King, who had a dream. He did not have a nightmare. And so, of course, we know it's important that people know that the value of sustainability is for future generations and for moral reasons, the ecological integrity of Earth systems and so on. But also, sustainability is important for themselves and for its own benefits, and that it can be appealing and valuable in its own right, and that it can be valuable right now rather than only in the future. And so the Institute, for example, concluded that normalizing sustainability is the key, getting people to just accept and embrace it rather than feeling like it's something that is forced upon them. A few other suggestions I sort of wanted to add on top of that are that, from my experience for many years as being an environmental educator, we can't approach communicating sustainability by being the environment police or directly attacking people's deeply held values. It's just counterproductive. And I think also that we have to recognize that as we want more and more people to embrace sustainability, that a growing green movement must be a sort of a broad church with many legitimately different different held values and views. And so perhaps as some of you have seen Monty Python's Life of Brian, we don't ever want to get into a situation where the Popular Front of Judea refuses to speak with the Judean Popular Front. And sometimes you see this with green groups infighting over quite petty detail when they should really be focused on the big picture of promoting sustainability. Just a bit more further research that's been done on working with the grain of human nature. And one of the groups that works with the SDC is called Sierra Communications. And they start essentially in their research by quoting an evolutionary biologist, Richard Dawkins, that they work with. And he says sustainability just doesn't come naturally to us. People are built to want to consume things, perhaps, and to seek prosperity. And most people, let's not lie, perceive sustainability as sort of the anti-prosperity, that sustainability is retrogressive, not progressive. And it's about loss and going back to the dark ages. So it's not a good thing necessarily. It's got a bit of a sort of PR problem. And so I think it's important that we must redefine how we view prosperity. And so the SDC and Sierra have essentially suggested that we need to seek an alternate hedonism, essentially that we want to seek the pleasurable life through an alternate approach to living, to the good life, than consumer individualism. And some of the principles of the alternate hedonism that they're suggesting are to illustrate the cost of living a life that's based on overconsumption. And so prevalent in the West, the stress and fatigue, anxiety and depression of working too hard, the lost opportunity to pursue relationships and non-economic activities when we're in work for hours God sends us. And that we should try and make our lives outwardly more simple, inwardly richer, spend more time working on our spiritual selves, relationships with our families and in the community, and non-economic activities. They suggest, for example, contrasting the US lifestyle, where we work these tremendously long hours, have some of the world's shortest holidays, may end up with the biggest cars and the biggest houses, but we have the highest consumption and carbon footprints. And perhaps contrast that with places where they're perceived to have a higher quality of life, such as the Italian Mediterranean lifestyle. They have longer holidays, longer lunches, siestas in the afternoon, more time to spend with their families and with the arts and non-economic pursuits, even though they may have smaller apartments and lower consumption habits. And I think this is possible in the USA. You've got already people doing it, the Amish from the old times, and in more recent times, people living as part of the slow food networks, the Simplicity Forum for America, the downshifter groups. So I think that's all pretty interesting research. Now I'll just sort of finish off by saying that I think one of the biggest obstacles we have to changing the way we see sort of a new kind of good life is this language of consumption that we're all using. Essentially that we communicate our identity and status through material goods, brands that we wear, the cars we drive. We show our love even at Christmas with giant piles of presents, and we advertise our achievements in life through material opulence, whether we know it or not, by feeling we have to buy a bigger house, improve the kitchen, buy some more mod cons to impress our friends, basically keeping up with the Joneses, and we become trapped in a positional competition where we're sort of constantly comparing and competing with our friends about how much stuff we have and how good the stuff that we have is. Maybe we grow in our jobs, we have to buy new suits as our status improves, buy the latest gadgets, keeping up appearances by going to more expensive restaurants and so on. And so enough is never enough, and we get caught in this trap whereby we think that opulence is the same thing as prosperity. But it just doesn't have to be that way. And so really just to end, there are, I think, two major changes that have to come about. The first is we need essentially a new macroeconomic model that is not based on endless consumption driven by growth, but that really needs to be government-led. But what we can do, and what we do need also, is a new cultural imagination whereby we reimagine how we can lead a good life without overconsumption, and to remember that prosperity does not equal opulence, to challenge our language of consumption, and basically to find ways of communicating and developing our relationships outside